Right.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Lectora Live, your inside track into Lectora. Here we go.
The editor itself is in the cloud, I think.
Whether it's complete, whether it's not complete, or the title area, as
So everything animates in the way it should.
And we're back. Hi, everyone. I'm Rick Zanotti, and this is Lectora Live. I'm joined today by a second-time guest. We've got with us Jared Schaalje, that handsome young lad to my left. Yes, to my left. It inverts here, so when I'm looking at it, I've got to invert it. Otherwise, it's optics. Anyway, Jared, how are you today?
Good. How are you? Thank you so much for having me.
Oh,
on the
you're
show
welcome.
again.
You've been busy this week. I saw part of your Brandon Hall presentation with John Blackman on the xAPI or the xAPI interface and what that's doing to learning management.
Yep.
Now, how did that go?
Good. Actually, I love talking about those things, especially because, especially with the xAPI interface, there's just so much possibility as we're moving into the new era of big data and gathering hundreds, if not thousands, of pieces of information per learner as they proceed through a course. And so, I love talking about that stuff. I probably could have talked maybe for another couple hours, and I of course enjoy visiting with you, Rick. And so I think if this interview went as long as 2 or 3 hours, I think you and I could still be visiting about this stuff because we love to brainstorm and talk about. And I love to hear your ideas. So
I didn't get to see the whole Brendan. I had some other things scattered. I saw about probably 20 minutes of it. Mm-hmm. And one thing that kind of struck me as I was listening to it, and I have read up on the xAPI and everything, and some of it's different. Like you've got the personal learning networks and everything else that you can tie into your interface. But a lot of what you guys were talking about in the beginning is stuff that could be done already, like keeping track of all the interactions. SCORM can do it. It's not the best at it, but AICC used to do it pretty well. The issue is you only had really 1,500 bytes of information, and with SCORM, like 1.2, I think you only have, I think it was 2K or 4K, and then I think SCORM, the current SCORM is 64K of information in those strings. But this is something I find interesting. Almost every company we've worked with, and there's been probably hundreds throughout the years, never keep track of interactions. They don't care. They don't analyze. Some do, but literally I would say 90% don't care. Pass, fail, incomplete, complete, you're done. It's like, wow, all that data that they could be gathering, they're not. Have you encountered that?
Absolutely. And I brought that up towards the end of the presentation. I said, probably one of the most frustrating things is that you can gather this type of information, and it's possible now to get a massive amount of data per learner, so you can really diagnose what she or he is struggling with. But many companies simply view training like an end user agreement, and that was the phrase that I used during my presentation. All they simply want is just a check. I finished. The learner finished the course, and it's I think it's quite sad because then it does become like end user agreements where nobody reads them except if you're stuck in an airport for 12 hours or you're a lawyer. And really all they want is a check mark that says she or he completed their HIPAA or OSHA or whatever training, and they're done and legally we're covered, so go on back to your work. And that's, I think, the tragedy of that, is that now we can gather as a person's proceeding through a course, not just in the 1950s, we were gathering, did they come to the course? Did they sit the whole way through? Did they stay? And what was their score? And that was it. We should be progressing past the 1950s. There's so much more we can gather per learner. And during my presentation, I likened it also to very similar to like a doctor, where if she or he only has 2 or 3 pieces of information on the patient, and that's all they have to work with, they're not going to make a great diagnosis. But if the doctor has 1,000 pieces of information on you, could be a really accurate, especially with that, per person and also per group. You can look at, what is this demographic struggling with? What is this specific demographic struggling with? And in companies I've worked with where, especially with front-end employees, they're tasked with using software that is extremely complex, and requires complex cognitive skills, and therefore the training should actually train those complex cognitive skills and track what they're doing. And what I mean by complex cognitive skills is instead of making one or two simple decisions, you're making hundreds of decisions.
Right.
And recently, project I was on, I was observing technicians in a healthcare setting, and asked one of the technicians, I said, how long did it take you to become fluent with this particular piece of software you're using for all this information here that you're gathering? And she said, honestly, it was about 1.5 years before I was fluent with it. I mean, because it's such complex software. And then recently I was talking with someone in the trucking logistics industry. He said they had just hired a new manager, and he said to me, he's like, but the poor guy, he's like, he was here on Saturday for 2 or 3 hours trying to do something that would have taken me 2 or 3 minutes. And it's going to take this new manager probably 2.5 years maybe to become fluent to level the rest of this.
Well, you brought up one point I thought was really interesting, and you brought it down.
That, we're using for entry-level employees. We should be training that and tracking that rather than do it 1950s. Did you come? Did you go? End user agreement type thing.
And one of the things that's real noticeable, and I thought was a very good example you gave several of these, that in one case they were losing $80,000 a day due to mistakes that nobody was really remediating. In another case, it was like $80 million lost in a year. That's a lot of money just on mistakes.
Huge amounts of money, yeah, and many of them. The one place with $80,000 a day, it was entry level employees, but still, medical software and logistics and whatever software is getting increasingly complex and requires, and as I've watched people and I've gone through the software training myself and use the software, I realize, you are making hundreds, actually, if not thousands, of little decisions along the way, and any mistake you make, even a common mistake, can be costly down the road. Costly in terms of wasted medication or wasted insurance or unpaid billing or things like that. Or a whole host of things. Or improper shipping if it's in logistics or whatever. But yeah, absolutely.
Now it's interesting because I think you like science fiction, and you like, if I recall correctly, you like Star Trek.
Love it. Yeah.
The original Star Trek. Remember Ensign Chekhov? So if we go back, 500 years from when that Star Trek was on to now, that has filtered into our training. Check off training. We just check off. Just think about it. It's an interesting correlation, but most training is all about indemnification, not actually training.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest issue I think we all run into, that I see more and more people doing acknowledgements of something rather than actually training the point. And unfortunately, from a legal perspective, if lawyers get a hold of that, the acknowledgement is probably not valid in court.
Right. You're exactly right. Yeah. And yet a lot of places, they just want, no, all we want to know is just, did they sit through the HIPAA training and was it good? And then that's fine. And and years ago I went through, I don't know, do you remember the SARS outbreak that happened?
Yes.
In 2003, I think it was, around then. And I remember attending a training where they had to herd close to 5,000 hospital employees through this 1 hour training. And at the end, I heard one of the doctors lean over and say, well, that was a waste of my hour. He got the check that he had attended the SARS training, and that was a legal requirement, and that was it. And then, and it was, what one person has called a spray and pray, just dump a ton of information and pray someone sticks. And goodbye.
And it wasn't really much of an outbreak here either, but that's another issue. And
all they tracked was the end user agreement, like you said.
Yep. And it's interesting. It's kind of where I guess I call that lawyered up training or companies versus trying to actually take advantage of all the tools that are out there. There's so much stuff that's out there. We worked with one company, actually several, that actually turned off tracking of any custom data. So therefore, even if you wanted to, you couldn't.
Wow.
It was turned off.
All they wanted was the 1950s.
We don't need no data. It's like,
wow. And yet, and I'd use this analogy too. Recently I was watching a documentary of an Egyptologist who really felt strongly that the timeline for Egypt needs to be shifted a couple hundred years in one direction, and it will match much better. But he said, but I don't have enough data to do it, to convince my colleagues. And because of that, I can't make a convincing argument. But I know that this is right, and I'm really positive about it. And here we've got the opposite problem. We can gather enough data to make those changes and to say, whatever it needs to be shifted this way in order to be more profitable or more effective.
Right.
And we have enough data.
There's one thing you said in the beginning that I was almost chuckling at when you said, if a doctor has 2 or 3 pieces of information, that's not enough to make a diagnosis, but that's all they have sometimes.
Yes.
And one thing a lot of doctors don't seem to rely on at all, which is sort of a shame, intuition. A good doctor can usually figure out based on experience, symptoms, things, questions asked, maybe now unless the person's an emergency and they're knocked out, that's different.
Right.
But a lot of times intuition plays a big role in diagnosing a patient and diagnosing diseases. I had an incident where I had a physical issue, which I didn't realize I had, and I thought I was having a heart issue. I thought I was having a brain issue. And this is when I was 40 years old. This is quite a while ago. I literally wound up going 6 months to different doctors. It was cardiologists, neurologists, general practitioners, this, that. They said, you're healthy, you're fine, nothing's wrong with you. Then why do I feel so badly? Why am I palpitating? Why am I dizzy? Why is the room spinning around me?
Yeah.
Well, I finally went to a chiropractor. And he goes, you've got a compressed suboccipital nerve, no big deal. Puts my head in a towel, pulls, my symptoms all disappear within a day.
The dizziness,
everything went away because the suboccipital nerve controls everything in the body. And when it's compressed, it shoots funny. So the nerve now is shooting incorrectly and it's giving you palpitations, you're sweating, you're dry, you're hot, you're cold, you're wet, you're thirsty. And it's all because that one nerve, which is the main nerve through the whole body, is confused.
Wow.
And a chiropractor in 5 minutes goes, oh, that's an easy one. I could tell right there. It's compressed.
That's amazing.
It was a structural issue from an old accident I had when I was 19.
And caught up with you.
And it caught up, and plus, working too many years on computers, and sometimes your ergonomics aren't good. You're looking up rather than looking kind of straight or more down, and it caused it to compress. And it was really funny because all the specialists, not even a clue.
Wow.
Because at least one of them might have said, you know what, that could be a compressed nerve.
Yeah.
Even the neurologist, he told me, you have stress. I go, I'm not really stressed, but I can deal with stress. Okay, he was Chinese. He goes, stress. But it was actually funny. Nothing, 6 months, nothing.
Yeah.
Not one solution. You go to another guy in alternative medicine, it was like, oh, that was easy. And it was. After that, I went for like 2-3 more treatments, gone. Whole symptoms gone. That's kind of a shame. It's something I've said when I was going to school in the old days. Medicine would have to change, but it hasn't. It really still is relying on data versus other things, or even experience to a point.
Yep.
But I think getting back to your point, data's out there. We call it big data.
Yep.
But I'd say in learning we have little data, very little data. Nobody really knows what's going on other than you took it and you completed it.
Yeah, and your story reminds me of, that intuition that you talked about comes from lots of experience and from data and from having because probably that chiropractor had a number of other experiences. He had a lot of data in his mind.
Yeah.
And when he saw you, he said, boy, Rick seems really similar to these 10 or 12
exactly.
other cases I recently saw. And, and I'm wondering too, if the physicians would have had more data on you, if they would have, captured, someone would have captured more data, they could have said, oh, you know what I think? This could be the suboccipital nerve that's compressed.
Right, but that also comes down to the fact they ask no questions.
Yes.
They measure you.
Yep.
But measuring isn't a response. That's just strictly a measurement. It's, okay, blood pressure is good. Okay, no problem there. Or they'll do an EKG, and that looks good.
Yeah.
Or they'll do a carotid artery test. You're fine.
Yep.
But what's the underlying cause? There's more than just the data.
Yeah.
And that again goes to the point of learning. There's more than just data. The data gives you a window into maybe an understanding or a pattern of behavior, of understanding, and maybe of application of the knowledge. What do you do with that? How do you analyze that afterwards? And I think that's going to the point you were making at the Brandon Hall seminar is, well, you take the data and then you look at the performance. And then you start going, okay, I get it. Oh, we just lost Jared. He may be capturing data right now.
Oh, are you still there?
There you are. We lost you for a second.
Let me see if we can bring us.
We figured you were data gathering.
Or too much data was flowing through the internet pipe here. I don't know. Yeah. So I think what I was about to say is you hit it right on the nose when you said the doctor wasn't maybe asking questions.
Right.
Like you should have been, and really that's what's happening in learning. The simulation or the course is asking the learner questions, and learners interacting and responding back and saying, the course or simulation says, do you know what I mean by this, or do you understand this, and what do you think of this? And then they're giving data, they're sending you data back just exactly in the way that you were talking about, where the physician asking questions. The physician probably should have been asking a lot more questions to gather that much data about you, and then he or she could have made a really, really good diagnosis, like
Right.
chiropractor.
Or at least come a lot closer. Also, there's another thing. Doctors don't touch you much. They
Yes.
do sometimes, but not that much. If they'll press on your stomach or on your liver, but they don't do a lot of touching. Maybe the orthopedic surgeons will, because they'll feel the. But if you notice, they're very hands off. And unfortunately, when you are dealing with certain conditions, you need to touch. You need to kind of feel, oh, wait, there's something here, or there's heat there. Oh, heat could be something. Why is there heat? And in the case of the occipital nerve, you could feel the swelling.
Yep.
It was
And that
interesting.
touching is very much analogous to a learning interaction in a course.
Exactly,
They're getting data from you, and by the end of that, they might actually have 200 or 300 pieces of information about you if
Right.
they're touching, asking questions. By the end of that 15-minute visit, they really could have 200 or 300 pieces of information, and if it's captured, think how much more accurate their diagnosis would have been.
Right. Yeah, it's just very interesting how that all works. Now, if you look at learning right now and some of the things we're capturing,
Yeah.
I'm not a big fan of assessments. I think they're this side of useless. I don't know how you feel about that, but every course has a 10 or 15 question assessment. I personally don't think they serve much of a purpose at all, and it's been proven that on any given day, a person could pass or fail the same test.
Yes, that is quite common. My opinion is if you're going to have questions in there, they need to be meaningful questions. And if you're going to assess, I think that every piece of content should be somehow reinforced systematically. But yeah, like you said, it doesn't necessarily have to be through an assessment either. But if it's reinforced somehow that the learner can remember and it's refreshed and brought back into their short-term memory so they can re-encode it into their long-term memory and actually remember it over time. But absolutely, you're right. I mean, some assessments are very much written at the low-level recall level.
Right, right.
And some are, well, in fact, I would almost say the majority of assessments that I have seen on a lot of courses and things are very poorly written. They're not worded correctly, and the wording is off, and that they make numerous errors such as double-barreled questions, and things like that. But yeah, I mean, if you're going to assess, I think it needs to be at a higher level. Go ahead and apply what I've done here, and let me gather data while you're applying the skill. Or go ahead and analyze this scenario and tell me what went wrong because you just learned about what you should have done here. Or predict the consequences. Now we've talked about what can happen. I want you to predict the consequences and tell me. Those I think are meaningful, but you're right. If it's just a simple multiple choice test, and I have seen, and I do remember too, in one of my graduate classes, one professor said, just so that you guys know, most of the questions you get at the end of chapters and things like that are actually not written by the professor who's the author. They're probably written by a couple grad students that they've hired for $7 or $8 an hour
Right.
to write a bunch of multiple choice questions. They say, here's the chapter, just write 20 or 30 multiple choice questions for me. And so you're right. I mean, in that respect, yeah, absolutely. That, like you said, someone could pass or fail the one in the same day. And I don't know if you've had the experience. I'm sure you have, but I've had it where I've gone through a course like that and taken the assessment, and at the end, I'm like, well, boy, I was lucky to have passed that because I really didn't understand. Or I'm like, I didn't get anything out of that assessment. Why did they put that at the end? I mean, have you ever had that experience?
That's true. I have, yeah. And if you look at like Microsoft MCSE, the Certified Systems Engineer exams, they're long, and they have a lot of the double barrel questions, or you have 4 choices which are all right, but one's righter. And I've met a lot of MCSEs of which probably half know nothing. So they can take a test, but they don't know how to apply it. And that's the other problem. Taking a test and saying, okay, I've complied, I've completed, it doesn't make sense. Now, one technique I like to use, and I get nixed almost every single time on it, which I think is a very good technique, and that is at the beginning of a course, I ask a question that was not taught. And that gives me an idea of where they stand or what kind of reasoning abilities they have. It's got to be more than just, here's data, absorb it, process it, and then you're done, move on.
Right.
What about testing their cognitive skills, their problem-solving skills. So if you're going to teach something on, let's say you're doing a compliance course on sexual harassment, ask something that you know is commonsensical and see how they answer it. And then take it from there. Did they get it? Did they not get it? And it's amazing when we have been able to do it, how little people actually try to make an effort to think about it or work the problem through.
Right. And exercise those active learning skills of solving a problem, you said, and using more complex cognitive skills. Yeah, absolutely. You mean, so you're saying, like at the beginning of a course, ask the student a question to see if they can apply commonsensical principles to solve a problem, and just to see how well they can even solve problems to begin with. I mean, 'cause that's really... Yeah,
because you have an idea what their skill set is based on what they're taking. Yep. So take it a little bit above what they know to see if they can figure it out.
Absolutely. And that's what's happening with so many of the software programs that I observed people using even just a few weeks ago in a medical setting, where each individual patient really required, it wasn't a cut and dry thing, it required a lot of troubleshooting where the person had to say, so what type of insurance is this? Okay, so what's, I mean, and every single case was different, and really what it required was problem solving, not necessarily memorization of, software skills.
Right.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And you had to troubleshoot, and you had to say, oh, wait a minute. If this happens, this warning is probably going to come up, and it's going to reject this claim because of this and this. So, okay, I'm going to have to do. But that's the kind of skills you need. Is those kind of things. Yeah.
Right. Because otherwise, you're just robotically going through everything. You don't really know why you're doing it. It's just a process. There's no process. It's just, well, I should say, there's no underlying understanding of the process. Just the process.
Yeah.
And that makes training a little more difficult. And then training has to always teach to the lowest common denominator and the most detail, just to learn the rudimentary part of it, rather than try to teach some cognitive skills where maybe they can figure out how to ask a question or what they need to ask, or maybe if there's a problem that they get in the software, they know how to work around it. Because ultimately it comes down to workarounds. How do you work around software that may not have everything you want, or at least make it easier to get what you want?
Absolutely comes to workarounds. That's the perfect word to use. You hit it right on the button, workarounds. And when people learn how to use those and say, okay, the person is having this and this and this issue. I don't think the software does this, but it does do this and this and this. Okay, I can get around it by doing that. And that's when a person becomes fluent, when they learn how to use hundreds of those workarounds. And then, and sometimes it, like some of the people I was talking to last week, it takes a couple of years to become that fluent to use those workarounds and use the software as a tool to solve problems. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Why don't we teach more of those types of skills? Yeah. Here's a possible kind of question to ask the patient in this situation, and here's a possible workaround, but here's a strategy to use to find a workaround. And yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and a lot of times we can set a scenario up. So in other words, you start with a scenario.
Yeah.
What if you run into something? What if, or what would you do? What would you react to? What would you consider? Just something to make it them. They have to come up with a solution. You're stuck in the desert. You have no water. What do you do? And you give them choices like, kneel down, pray, and just wait. It's like, it's almost over. I mean, what do you do? How do you work around the problem? And you can get a lot of information by how people answer that problem. The U.S. government years ago, and I say years ago because now it's crazy, but years ago, they would ask if you wanted to immigrate to this country. It was a really stupid question. Do you have any plans to assassinate anyone while in the country? And you would be surprised how many idiots would say, yeah. And so they got their visas denied. And you just go, that's brilliant.
Right.
So a lot of them would say, yeah, just to be smartasses. And, the problem is that got them out of a trip. And they're blocked for life pretty much. It's really hard to reapply after that.
Yep, when that's on your record.
And it would work. It's just, you just go, that's brilliant. Of course, some idiot would go, oh, yeah, sure, yeah, doink. When I was growing up in New York, I had to have a subway pass because I lived a little further from school at one age. And so I would take a subway to school, and we had our passes. And when you applied for your pass, it asked you, are you retarded? Well, if I am, would I know it? And if I'm not, would I say it anyway just to be snide?
Right.
But it was the dumbest question. And I said no, but you always wonder what would happen if I said yes.
And yet, many of those questions do test, is the person really paying attention? Are they even thinking about the question? Or are they just answering robotically? And yeah. And sometimes those kind of questions do tease out something, that...
Oh, my favorite thing was we ordered an IBM system one time. This is back in the early 80s. And it was an IBM system 38 or something. And when we got it, in the box it said, read me first. So we picked it up, opened up, and read the first letter that was there. That was saying, this box contains the following: the instruction manual, the this, the that, the this, and this letter. If this letter is not present, please call your IBM representative right now to let them know that the letter was not included. And I'm thinking, this is a joke, isn't it?
And did people end up...
I don't know, but we were thinking of calling just to say, hey, we got the letter. Thanks for letting us know that was important. But literally, you wonder, did that actually get through, and was it a joke? Somebody just had a sneaky sense of humor, or was it actually some metaphysical meaningness to that? I don't know.
Yeah. Wow, but you're right. I mean, and that is very similar to the visa question you brought up, and those kind of things that. Yeah. But. In a way, they're assessing, a person. Can you comprehend this question? And do you, are you thinking commonsensically? Are you using critical thinking skills? Things like that. And yeah, absolutely. And I think so much training though is very much like the end user agreement. You just want to herd them in, software training, get them out, and then management can check off. All of my employees have been through the 3-hour mandatory, whatever training it is, whatever kind of medical software or whatever they're using. Check, they're good to go.
Yeah, we have clients that have literally take 30 hours a year of compulsory training, mostly compliance. 30 hours that's almost a full week of training on things that they already know. If they don't know it, it's really a waste to have to do it again. But it's mandatory. It's that checkoff. It's got to get they've done it. Good. We're now indemnified. Life is wonderful. It's just like, okay. Now, since last we saw each other, Lectora has done some pretty cool things. They came out with, they actually light-yeared 4 versions ahead. They went from version 12 to version 16.
Yep, absolutely love it. Yeah.
We don't know if they had a time warp when they did that or what, but they did it. That's a big leap.
We're getting closer to the Sci-Fi Channel. So many of the scenarios I see on Sci-Fi are like, that's actually not too far away from here. Yeah, so
that's true.
Right. I think they did a time. Yeah, I love what they've done. Yeah.
They've had a lot of stuff. What are some of the things that you've noticed and liked about version 16?
So you're talking about Lectora Online? Are you
online or Lectora desktop, but they're both on the 16 basically.
Yep. Yeah. I primarily use, I exclusively use the Lectora Online for all of my e-learning projects and things like that. And so, some of the features, so again, what I've used Lectora for, and what I found it even more efficient now with the new version, again, is rapid building of templates, and then being able to move things around quickly, and again, as you've said before, the chapter analogy that they use is so useful for so many different applications and for branching and things like that. I have noticed it was even more efficient for me now with because I do so much development and things like that. So I guess just overall, I have noticed that it's a faster, more efficient platform, and yeah.
Well, it's funny. You and I are both on the Lectora Advisory Board. And I was thinking something funny we should do. We should actually talk about new features that may be coming out, but we'll mute it so nobody can hear what we're talking about. But that would be kind of ridiculous.
That'd be great.
16 did make it a little bit easier, nicer, and it was already pretty good at 12. They've added some nice functionality. The responsive learning is very well implemented.
Yep.
I thought they did probably the best job I've seen yet of easily making learning responsive across all the platforms or devices without having to do a lot of rework or a lot of even copying and pasting or anything to make it fit the new environment. They actually had a very innovative approach of collapsing itself on and expanding itself all with the grid. It's pretty neat.
Yeah. Particularly you're talking about with when you can look at it through mobile and then and also landscape and then flip.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I guess that's what I'm talking about with making things even more efficient because, and now it's even easier when you have clients requesting that type of training. So,
Sure.
and in an instant being able to see it flip. And I guess too, what I'm thinking, again, with xAPI, can I draw a diagram here for you?
Sure.
And see, hopefully this will show up okay over the web. But what I've seen that Lectora has made, I started using Lectora originally because we were building SCORM compliant courses back in 2003, and it was really difficult. We didn't have a programmer. And then suddenly I found Lectora for the place where I was working, and I was able to rapidly build SCORM compliant courses within a matter of days and make them SCORM compliant in seconds. And and so with SCORM, I'm just going to draw, if this is the, let's see if you can see this here. If this is the learning path that a learner is following here, can you see that line there?
Sort of. Yeah.
With SCORM, we were sending data a few different places. Let's see. We're sending data here and here and here as a learner proceeds, and capturing some of the basic, when companies just want to capture the basic 1950s type of data. And then afterwards, with xAPI, I'm just going to draw this. Sending tons of pieces of information. You can see all these as a learner proceeds, sending data here, and here, and here, and all through. And it's with the new versions of Lectora, it's just become easier to create these types of things. But and also, so that would be like a regular course. There's one path, you proceed from start to finish, and even if a person has to get the right answer before they can proceed on, whether it's a simulation or something like that, with xAPI you can send data to see what is the first option they chose. Because that also can be really telling about a person if their first instinct was to make the wrong choice,
right,
and to not use a common sense choice. I've worked on a project where we captured that because some people wanted to know that. They said, who and how often is this occurring when they continually to make this error? Because this is really costing us a lot of money. And that was really fascinating to capture that, to see, even on a multiple choice question, this group of people and this person here and these people here, that they specifically chose this option first. That was their gut instinct, and that was incorrect, and that's what's costing a lot of money. And now with the simulation, it's where you branching off.
Sure.
And I agree with you. You're talking about assessments may not be the best thing. I completely agree. I think sometimes maybe a simulation is almost always the best choice. But a simulation where you can branch off like this. Sorts of all over the place. Before with learning objects, again, we were just sending data at the beginning and at the end. Did they make it through here? We sent data here, and then here at the end, did they make it through? That was about it. But now with xAPI, you can send literally thousands of data points, and you can call them whatever you want instead of, and I do love that feature in Lectora as well, that you don't just have to use standard ADL verbs. You can use whatever you want and call them. And we have done a number of projects like that where the people would call them, whatever the common error was that people were making, they would call them that, so it would send that exact statement to the LRS. And so here, I'm just kind of an example of what was happening now, and what's easier to do now with Lectora is in a simulation where it branches off and you've got chapters and things, people can go everywhere. You're sending tons of data as they're going through, sending a huge amount of data here and here and here and here and here. And then at the end, so this person went this way through the simulation, or this person went this way and ended up here. And all the choices they made along the way, by the way. And specific names of the choices because you've named them. And that's what I find easier and easier to do now in Lectora, even with this new version, is to create those types of simulations and then capture data all along those different points there. So
right.
Did that kind of make sense, my diagram there? I don't know.
Yeah. Now from a practical perspective, because there's a lot in the xAPI that is practical, but not highly. Most companies don't care about it. They don't care about your own personal learning. That's your problem.
Yeah.
How much of the xAPI is being implemented by people A lot of LMSs don't yet support the xAPI.
Yeah.
I mean, they barely support SCORM 2004, frankly, or even for that matter 1.2. But who's that's only what, 2003 or something, 2002.
Yeah.
We're only in 2016, and we're still not supporting LMSs to their full extent.
Yep.
What do you think is the how should I put it, the acceptance of xAPI, and how many companies do you think are actually even looking at it?
I would say right now it's a fairly still small minority of places. Although when I have presented this type of thing to managers and others and executives, and I've said this is what we can do, and this is what it will take, and this is an LRS, which is very inexpensive. I mean, the LRS that I've used in different places, it was literally so inexpensive that I could have afforded. I mean, it didn't take a corporate budget. I could have just, a regular person could afford.
Right.
It was
now, can you define LRS for those who don't know?
Absolutely, a learning record store, and that's what captures all of those statements from an xAPI course, a learning record store. So it's not the same thing as an LMS, but what I've used is an LRS inside an LMS. So the LMS launched the course and things like that, and then the LRS was gathering that data, and then the LRS could send that data to the LMS. So the learning management system could then afterwards have all that data available for HR purposes or for whatever. And I remember it was really exciting with one executive to be able to show him here, and I pulled it up in a matter of seconds. I mean, you could categorize things in the LRS and rearrange tables, and then you can also do complex statistical calculations outside of it after. But I just really quickly pulled it up for him, and I showed him, here is specific names and people. This is when they took the course, and these are the exact errors you were talking about that they made. This was their first choice right there. And you could look at that and go, oh, okay. I mean, it was, in a sense, like having, at least in my view, an ultimate diagnostic tool to say, here's the exact group of employees, here's who made these costly error, and not to penalize, but just to know who to retrain and how to retrain them, making training meaningful. I mean, when you have so much data in LRS, you could, just like you said, Rick, what you were talking about earlier, you could find out, which 35 or which 800 employees are having these errors, get them together and train them on complex cognitive strategies and troubleshooting strategies and problem-solving strategies. You could see a huge organizational return on investment for something like that, So
yeah, and I would venture to say that what you found with 80,000 a day or 80 million a year, or even more or less, depending on the size of the companies, it's pretty prevalent everywhere. It's widespread. Yeah, and yet, absolutely. Most managers don't realize that the LMS can do more than just pass-fail, complete, incomplete, check off. They don't even know what it can do. And most of the LMS managers don't inform anybody of what the LMS can do.
Yeah.
So as a result, you have a situation where an LMS is really a pretty highly priced piece of junk that just launches a course. You could launch it through HTML, and then it tracks and goes, oh, you passed, or oh, you completed. And that's it. You don't really have any other information.
And there's so much more. Absolutely.
I know. Yep.
In many of my conversations with you, I get the feeling, do you ever feel like you and I are the people who know that eating lime will prevent scurvy, and yet, it's going to take 100 more years for people to finally adopt it because they're, or people realizing they're driving a Tesla and they're still using it like a Model T,
Right,
and
right.
Like, don't you realize what you could,
I mean, and they don't. In today's day and age, and I was in IT for over 20 years, and I think I started my first programming class back in the early 70s.
Yeah.
To this day, people are not that computer savvy. They're desktop savvy in terms of some apps, but they don't know how to do anything on a computer.
Absolutely. And they're phone zombie savvy. I mean, they become a phone zombie where they're constantly on their phone and flip. But you're absolutely right. They're not computer savvy, especially in the complex cognitive way of really, do you know what you can use this software for or how it can really help you? You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah. And the average, for example, instructional designer or technology, I don't see that much instructional design degrees as much as I see instructional technology, which is kind of a weird misnomer. Most of them do curriculum management. So they set up curriculums. They don't necessarily write, and they don't necessarily look at how to make it better from a cognitive perspective or even just a performance perspective. It's just putting a curriculum together.
And that's the heart of having a training program and a return on investment is absolutely that. Yeah. Do you ever feel that same pang then of,
oh, we do all the time.
And you know it will cure scurvy, but people just will not listen,
Yeah, no, it's true. And it really drives me up a wall when I hear people say, you can't put an ROI on learning. That's BS. Of course you can.
Absolutely can.
Because if you don't, you're just trying to validate your existence because you don't know what you're doing. Because frankly, if you don't have an ROI, then you have no business case for what you're doing.
Absolutely. I agree with that.
And training isn't something metaphysical that you have to learn only through the wisdom of, no, you can totally manage training. You can totally analyze training, but people don't take it. There are some companies we know that do, and surprisingly, they're very successful. The ones that don't, they're successful, but they're struggling through the success because they don't always understand why are we having these problems. Or they rely on the instructors, the instructor-led part of the training to identify the issues, not the computer part.
Yeah.
Which, again, is sort of odd because the computer can also help identify a lot of those touch points that are incorrect, that just need tweaks, little tweaks along the way to make it better.
Absolutely. And with what you just said, not only can ROI be measured, but it can be measured with precision and accuracy, and it can be done easily. Yeah. And you're absolutely right, but a lot of people don't do it. And you know, one of the things you mentioned too about instructor-led training, instructors are good because they can see trends. But like you said, if an instructor can only, you know, if she or he has 300 learners from the corporation, they're not going to be able to know every single learner's problems, you know? And if you had a computer program that could capture all of that and then give that to the instructor and say, here, this group is having largely these types of problems. This group here is largely having these types of problems. And then, it can enhance what the instructor does. And absolutely, and you know, so much could be captured there that could make instructor-led training better and more rich and more productive. Where, you know, when a manager sends an employee to a 3 or 4 hour half-day seminar, you know, then when that employee comes back, that manager, she knows, wow, this employee is going to be a much better productive employee because I know that this training is truly productive. I mean, that's when you see an ROI, you know, that's what ROI is, when the manager sends them away and knows, I don't have to fire this employee. I bet if I send them to this, they're going to come back and they are going to be a different person and they're going to be highly productive in the software. They're not going to keep making these common errors. That's when training is really powerful, you know, but it has to have that much data gathered about the individual person. And you know, and if people were to go through a whole series of xAPI courses, you know, and simulations, and then the instructor had that data to go on, oh my goodness, can you imagine how, I mean.
Well, yeah, and then you can see the real trends, because let's say you have 1,000 people doing data entry. Well, maybe the instructor sees 100 of them, but he doesn't, that they don't see every person, and like you said, they don't get to know or really analyze, because in a class you're going to have slow people, medium people, and really fast people. In most classes, the fast people are just left behind. They don't care. They've moved on. They just go on their own. The medium people sort of pay attention, and the ones who the teacher focuses on are the slow ones. And that happens everywhere. No matter how much I've done instructor-led training, and I've always said, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. You wind up doing it because they're the ones who have the most questions and get left behind. And it's always a tough balance. How do you which one do you give the most attention to? But in the computer world, you don't have that issue. Once they take a test, or once they actually take a course, and through knowledge checks or whatever, or how you ask things, that could make a huge difference in productivity and frankly in that return on investment. Because that company that you were, those two companies you work with that were losing 80,000 a day and 80 million a year, well, guess what? By identifying those issues, now they're 80 million richer.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and it makes such a huge difference. I mean, think what you could do, how many more people you could hire. You know, I mean, it's endless. You know, with that much savings, and it really goes back to what you mentioned at the very beginning with your analogy, which is a true analogy of the doctor who finally knew what was going on in the back of your neck, that it was a pinched occipital nerve. You know, if you can send people through something like this, you know, a branch stimulation, and then you know in the end, okay, this. You know, this learner this is what's going on. This is how I can best help him or her, and they can, you know, really progress. I mean, it's very much like the pinch occipital. I mean, that was a return on investment. Finally, for the money you put for the chiropractor, you actually got something back in return. Yeah,
the $40 visit did what the rest of the $10,000 test didn't do.
Exactly.
I did about 4 or 5 tests, and they were not cheap. From treadmills to this to that, and it's like nothing. Nobody found anything.
And I can tell you, as a public health researcher, you're not alone in that type of scenario either. I mean, there are many people, like you said, that spend massive amounts, or insurance companies spend massive amounts. I mean, that costs your insurance company a lot of money, costs you personally a lot of money.
Oh, sure. Time. Yeah.
And what did you get out of it? But that $40 you spent on that chiropractor, you got a higher.
I had a solution at the end.
Yep. You got a return on your investment. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's pretty amazing. And then I just kind of shook my head and go, not one.
This chiropractor had this type of information.
Yeah, and he walked in and he immediately felt the neck and goes, "Oh, this is an easy one."
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going. He just felt it. I told him a little bit of the symptoms. He goes, "Okay, having dizziness, okay, and you have okay. Let me look. There you go, right there."
Yep.
Grabs a towel. Talk about low tech. Grabs a towel, wraps my head on it, and pulls. I'm
and
like,
your symptoms are gone.
That felt good. A little bit of traction.
And now Lectora has given us the tools, and even with this newer version, has given us tools to do it even faster, so that we can build those types of solutions that get rid of that, that give people an ROI. They get rid of that pinched occipital nerve in the organization. If I can use that analogy, organization-wide. Sure. I mean, maybe the organization has a pinched occipital nerve somewhere in this department here. And now Lectora gives you the tools to create them fast. You don't have to be a programmer or I mean, it's very easy to do and a very easy to use interface. And,
It's true, and. It is sort of interesting. Well, Jared, believe it or not, we have already gone way past what we were supposed to.
Well, I always love our visits like this. I know that, like I said, you and I could probably talk for 2 or 3 more hours on this, because it's fascinating. And I really enjoy your creativity and hearing, how you have the same vision of what e-learning can do and the power of it. So I appreciate you.
There's got to be more than just, here's a test, you pass, you fail, or you complete, you incomplete. How boring.
Yeah. The end user agreement. It's got to be more than
the end user agreement. That's so true. And how many times do you just say yes to agree to every single end user agreement?
Yeah,
do you know your children are owned by 26 corporations right now?
And those end user agreements, I bet 99.9% of people never read those.
No, they don't.
Always check yes. And the only reason the company does them is just for legal purposes.
Yeah, and if you read them, you wouldn't sign it.
Right.
I guarantee you wouldn't sign it.
Right. Yep. Yeah. And yet all they need is that, Jared signed it, so therefore we're indemnified, or, you mentioned indemnification, or, whatever.
That happens in everything, not only in those end user agreements, but any lease or contract you sign. If you buy a car, you lease a house, rent anything.
Yep.
If you read the fine print, it's pretty amazing what you're actually signing off.
Oh, absolutely.
But you have to read it, and it's also a 4-point type or 6-point type, so people just kind of glean over it. Yep. And they always tell you, it's just a standard agreement, just sign it.
and they know you're in a rush. I got to install the software fast. I got to move to the house. I don't care. I'll just sign it. Yep.
And so you do. And then, of course, Apple says, great, we now own you, and we can take anything off your machine we feel like, and we do sometimes.
Yeah.
That actually happened to me once, and it happened to a lot of people. I had an app. I don't even remember what it was, but it was some sort of app I downloaded from the store, and one day it's gone because Apple decided that app was not valid.
And you could sign the agreement. So
and they took it. It's like you just took it off my
part of the agreement in the fine print said, Rick signed here, therefore, at any time we can revoke his privileges to this app. Right?
That's right. That's right. And Apple can do it anytime they want. They have done it. They've taken apps off that they decided they didn't like anymore.
Wow.
That's nasty. They almost killed the developer market at one point because you could only develop with Apple stuff, and they blocked everybody off and removed their apps. Wow. And then I guess there was some lawsuits and whatever else, and then they saw the wisdom and capitulated on it. But it wasn't because of anything other than probably lawsuits. But
that has so many parallels in business, what you just described there, that people just going through the end user agreement, you're not going to have an ROI, and eventually they're going to lose their app or whatever, and they don't know. I mean, just going through end user agreement training, you're not going to have an ROI at the end.
No, that's true. It's really interesting.
You're probably going to lose money on training, plus lose money on employees that really,
Now, you're going to the Lectora User Conference, right? You're presenting?
Oh, yeah, I definitely have to go, And I'd love to meet up there, yeah.
So what are you talking on in the conference?
I haven't submitted anything yet. So are you presenting there?
I am.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, I'm presenting on kind of a reprise with some other information on storytelling and immersive learning.
Really?
Yeah.
That's great.
I'm
still.
So that thing you were working on us with, the immersive training that we converted from a different application to Lectora, that'll be used. That'll be used as an example of how to create simple immersive training.
Awesome, which was great, and that's an example where a tool like Lectora, you can create something immersive. It didn't take that long, to do. The stuff was there. you put it into an immersive training, and then it actually felt like what you had designed there was great. I mean, you walk into a room, you want to pick up the book, you want to talk to the person, you go to the next room. It felt immersive. It felt real.
And it was only an example. I mean, we didn't build it to be a full course, though we did later on for another company, but they ruined the whole idea because the idea was self-learning.
Yes.
It was kind of like an adventure game. In fact, it was patterned after something I used to do with my daughter when she was about less than 2 years old, and that was called Just Grandma and Me. It was a great game for kids because you would say, little critters, and little critters go to the beach. So the critter with grandma goes to the beach, and everything, they get outside and there's a mailbox. You click on the mailbox, something comes out, or a hand comes out, or you get a piece of mail. Everything was clickable.
Yeah.
And they had a ton of, because some of it was funny, some of it was serious, some of it gave you a hint as to what you needed to do. You got on the bus, you could talk to people. It was pretty cool. And this was done 26 years ago.
Wow.
It was a very innovative game.
Because even then, it was possible to do things like that.
And it was possible. Yeah, it was probably done with Director or something like that back then. And it was really a cool game. You just look at it and go, wow, why can't we do that now? And we can, but we don't do that often. I don't see a lot of immersive training.
No, and I don't know if you remember in the 80s, the Choose Your Own Adventure books that came out.
Yes.
That was also in itself an immersive experience. And I had one manager many years ago, about 10 years ago, he said that he worked for... is it Les Schwab or Michelin? And he said that the managers there had a thick manual. And he said it was one of the best trainings he had ever been to because the manual itself was a choose your own adventure. So you go through all these scenarios. If you want to fire this person, go to page 10.
Okay.
And then you go to page 10 and experience this consequence. If you choose not to fire this person, go to page 13. And it was, you go through this whole thing. And he said it was immersive and meaningful. And like your daughter, I bet she still remember. I mean, it was meaningful, She actually learned something and progressed from that, And
I think. Well, she's actually doing multimedia development now.
Yeah. So yeah.
It's a little bit of Just Grandma and Me.
Right. Yeah.
But no, those things were great because it also got you creative. You weren't forced down a normal route.
Yeah.
Your decisions gave you different routes, and that could be done easily with any kind of business training, and we don't or rarely do, because they either think it takes too long, which it doesn't, or they don't quite get the benefit of it.
Yep.
Make the mistakes here, but don't make them in the real world. Make them in the simulation. Then when you get out, okay, good. I mean, if you look at military and police training, they go through simulations a lot, real live simulators, where they can be shot or obstacles can come at them, things like that, so that when they're actually in the real world doing this, they're familiar with it. It's not something totally new. These simulations can be pretty scary sometimes.
Yeah.
But
especially high fidelity ones that are really
yeah. I mean, look at the pilot simulators. Those are amazing. They literally can crash that plane and they'll feel some of the effects. These things feel every bump, every bit of turbulence. It's all felt.
And you also feel the emotion of that event.
Yes.
In that scenario, I did not react well. I'm so glad it wasn't in an expensive setting where I would have accidentally ruined someone's liver. What I mean?
That's true. Well, they've done a lot of simulations for surgeons. So that they can operate virtually to get a feel for what they're trying to do, especially on complex operations.
Yep. And I absolutely loved years ago, I was with a nursing project where they had, I think they've got a lot more affordable now, but they were using a simulation that had cost a university about $100,000, and it was an upper body of a male who would die if you didn't do things right, whose heart would pump, who would lose blood, and it was really cool. And it got them thinking, and they would program scenarios in from a computer module, and things have gotten even more sophisticated now with those nursing simulations. But yeah, you're right. Nursing, surgeons, aviation is such a prime example of that, though.
Yep.
And the power of high fidelity. That's when you come away a different person, and you're like, okay, now I can fly.
That's true. Well, for all you people who thought we ended the show 15 minutes ago, we just went on another 15 minutes. So. Anyway, Jared, appreciate you coming on today. I look forward to seeing you at the LUC 16 in May.
Likewise.
Fort Lauderdale. Sounds pretty. It should be a fun trip, and definitely let's get together when you're down there, and if not before that.
Yep.
Well, anyway,
it's always a pleasure.
Oh, same here. Well, have a great one, and for all you people watching the show on YouTube, please subscribe. We are going to be going live soon, so stay tuned for that. We're going to go live and do the recordings. We're going to put the recordings up on Vimeo. we will be doing the live recordings on YouTube. So that's coming up probably within another week. That should be fun. Anyway, have a good one, everyone. Jared, again, thanks a lot, and we'll see you all next week on Lectora Live. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.